Welcome everyone to this second session devoted to contemporary creation. We are going to start with the presentation by Miloslav Kalik, Spirituality in the Microtonal Key, Hermeneutic Reflections on Juro Zivkovic's On the Guarding of the Heart. I hope I pronounced it correctly.
Perfectly.
Thank you.
This is towards the end of the piece, and this is how the Serbian-Swedish composer Juro Zivkovic, how he sees his artistic aims and the process of composing. The composer is not the ultimate authority on his own work, and in due course, our discussion will veer away from the territory he stakes out for himself. At present, however, we will heed his words and follow their ramifications. We will examine these relationships to something external, or what seems to be external to music, the charger for his spiritual batteries. Our focus will be on his Gromeyer Award-winning composition On the Guarding of the Heart for chamber, orchestra, and piano. Even a cursory look at the score reveals its compositional intricacy, and microtonality, indicated in my title, is just one of the facets that contribute to the complexity of the work. Those who are truly microtonally minded might find the whole affair disappointing. Microtonality is actually reduced to occasionally quarter tones, often placed in a texture that precludes the recognition of any individual pitch. Yet there is more to this that meets the eye. In fact, microtones do play an important role, and it will transpire that they owe part of their significance to what they are not, to the roles they do not perform. Microtonality in Zivkovic arises from several sources. He draws on various facets of Serbian traditional music, which, like every traditional music, does not operate on the 12-tone equal temper basis. This includes ancient rural heterophonic singing, wailing for the dead, chanting of the Serbian Orthodox Church, and the chordophone instrument gusle used to accompany the reciting of epic poetry. At the same time, he's very much involved with exploring mathematical acoustical relations, which is in turn connected with his interest in ancient Greek philosophers / mathematicians / acousticians, Pythagoras and Archytas. He thinks of them in terms of mathematical relations in music, but also of the metaphysical and ethical quality of their ideas and the unity between harmonies, astronomy, music, and humanity. Microtones can thus be seen to mediate between the heterogeneous sources of his inspiration, folk and church intonations, Pythagoras, Archytas, and Plato, and at the same time, the cutting-edge compositional techniques proper to our time. Between the crude and spontaneous of the demotic provenance and the calculated and contrived, between the archaic and modern, mundane and celestial. He endeavors to achieve totality, to condense everything in mind and soul, which points to a spiritual, indeed mystical aspect to his work. Joining him now in his spiritual quest and looking for a beacon, we would probably find it in his statement about trying to squeeze yourself and art together to get the essence. Fighting for the essence is the most important in the creation of art. With microtones, he probes the subatomic level of musical substance, in the pursuit of that essence. The substance is infinitely divisible. We are on a mission of reaching for the infinite. That infinite is not some great beyond. It does not require any expansion of boundaries. It is infinite difference within the matters, and indeed within ourselves. It is perhaps an infinite that would allow us to be bounded, Hamlet, to a nutshell, and still count ourselves masters of infinite space. But as we shall see, unlike Hamlet, we do have something to guard us against bad dreams. The infinite divisibility also means that the essence remains unattainable. A line must be drawn somewhere. Jankovic draws it at quarter tones. As a practicing musician, a professional violinist, and improviser, he's aware how problematic smaller divisions become both for the performer and the listener. But it is not only practical considerations why a limit is needed. His microtonal milieu is there to mediate between the unfathomable depths of the essence he searches for and the experiential world. It is an event horizon, a barrier, even if an arbitrary one, beyond which the acoustic substance condenses into an acoustic black hole. It guards us against the dark matter energy of the musical universe. Ibi sunt draconis, perhaps. We need to be guarded. The composer cautions us to examine ourselves constantly. We ought to pay attention to our inner kingdom, the heart. We should guard our heart, not allowing any wrong things to enter into it. This said, we have pinned down the key source of his spirituality. It revolves around Eastern Orthodox mystical texts collected under the title Philokalia, written between the 4th and 15th centuries by spiritual masters of the Hesychastic tradition. The word Philokalia means love for the good and for beauty. The incarnate God, Christ, teaches us to love everybody, dead and future born, even those who do wrong to us, even to love a stone or a tree, all visible and invisible, be it alive or not. Do pay attention to this, be it alive or not. Are we hearing some pantheistic overtones? Spinozistic, natura sine deus? In due course, we shall see how this reverberates through Gilles Deleuze and his plane of immanence. At the very core of Jankovic's spiritual interest lies the text on watchfulness and the guarding of the heart by Nikiforos Nemanja. The mind tends to wander and lapse into unholy thoughts, hence the need to be vigilant, to focus on the essence of one's life, reject anything that could divert our thoughts from God, and guards our hearts against evil. The unity of intellect, mind, and body is paramount. Nikiforos advises certain exercises that are corporeal as well as spiritual. On one level of understanding, Jankovic seems to be treating his spiritual subject matter in an almost literal way, as a sound painting, his words, of Philokalia. He would even provide verbal translations of music. Quote, the beginning of the piece starts like a small turbulence. It is as if your brain was processing something, and suddenly you continue to think about something not so true, superficial. Then the piano comes in and says, stop, concentrate, guard your heart. The music is saying, pay attention to yourself, focus on the essence of your life. In more general terms, Jankovic apparently projects a level of transcendence, in the sense that his meanings go beyond music. Indeed, his self-reflections are doubly transcendent, since his transcendent extra-musical world presumes a deity, a power transcendent to that world itself. At this point, we have come dangerously close to misconstruing his music as merely a vehicle for some transcendent goals, to be analyzed and interpreted through deciphering the spiritual subtitles that we or the composer reads into it. However, although the title and the composer's comments lead us toward extra musical meanings, these meanings direct us to self-examination, to our inner kingdom, the heart, relentlessly seizing hold of the kingdom of heaven within us, as Nikiforos puts it. Ultimately, the idea is not to express something extraneous, to underwrite a program. It is rather that these concepts serve as a vehicle for affirming music's fundamental role in human lives and its unsurpassable capability for performing this role. The composer may see that role through the lens of spirituality, of faith, of essence. But we can also couch this in different terms. Psychoanalytic, for instance. It is then the role of incorporating the deepest and the most archaic layers of our mental organization in our conscious and rational lives. It may be a bit of an outrage, first to mix Eastern orthodoxy with Deleuze, and then to toy with Freudian psychoanalysis in this context. But it transpires that in whichever set of mental coordinates we locate ourselves, perspectives seem to converge. Thus, the universe of his music apparently transcends music, but as it unfolds, it transcends the transcendence and falls back on itself on imminently musical meaning. It is no chance that I'm using the word fold. The inspiration comes from Deleuze's fold, Leibniz and the Baroque, but I discussed this in another paper. Anyhow, the immanence of musical meaning is tested against transcendent forces, becoming something I would call enhanced immanence, hyper-immanence. It does not offer us a knowledge of what philokalia is or what spirituality is. It doesn't represent, and Tarasti doesn't paint it. It rather sets up conditions for the listener to become spiritual. We ought not to comprehend microphones or any other musical event as signifying theological concepts. They do not refer to the essence of one's life. They become that essence, or perhaps create, or evolve with it in mutual co-determination. In what is philosophy? Deleuze and Guattari assert that the transcendent is vertical, celestial. The transcendent element must always give way or submit to a sort of rotation in order to be inscribed on the always immanent plane of nature thought. Thinking here implies the projection of the transcendent on the plane of immanence. Transcendence descends and crosses different hierarchized levels and that are projected together on a region of the plane. With this in mind, I insist that it is the force of music that effectuates the rotation, whereby the philosophical religious concepts are transformed into musical percepts and affects. Within our customary Cartesian coordinates, philokalia is vertical, yet with a potential for horizontalization. Christ is God incarnate, and he teaches us. But we can think of him as becoming what he teaches. He not only teaches love, he is love. The vertical, transcendent, coming from above, is projected onto the plane of immanence. For a believer, it is the divine power. For me, it is the power of artistic creation that accomplishes the projection. But this plane of immanence upon which everything is laid is not a field of immobile, ossified objects deployed according to an a priori given, externally imposed plan. It may appear so when we speak about the timeless tenets of faith, or the essence of life, or about eternal, immutable truths. Indeed, for some authors, Grimalt does offer a utopia of stability and order. There is hardly anything stable and clearly defined in his music. He seems to question the identity of every element in music, form, genre, thematic procedures, down to individual pitches and the very idea of tone. He questions even the identity of music itself, having first questioned all its elements and then making it at times indistinguishable from noise and silence. There are no fixed points and positions, only nomadic lines wandering in seemingly unpredictable directions. Despite incessant repetitions, musical ideas, we feel only flux, a continuity of change. What repeats is an endlessly becoming something different. Events do not have beginnings and ends. They are always in the middle. They form plateaus, as there is in what I would say. Nor can we define dimensions of its space. Events escape the coordinates of the striated space, forming the smooth space of speeds and intensities. To speak specifically of microtones, they do not establish a system of pitch organization. They do not meaningfully add a number of pitch classes to the overall pitch collection. They do not enhance functionality by sharpening or flattening reading tones. They do not decorate melodies. They do not even directly invoke their demotic, ecclesiastic, or ancient Greek sources. When all plausible identities are subtracted, what remains may be particles in Brownian motion, a sword, a becoming molecular, to use this marvelous libertarian phrase. With microtones, we were probing the depth of musical substance. But if we reverse the perspective, we can also regard them as issuing from the chaotic depths of the body of music. That would be certainly body without organ things. The chaos that reigns beyond that barrier is not only threatening. It is also the genetic medium from which order emerges. Art takes a bit of chaos and puts it into frame in order to compose the chaos that becomes sensory, like a seed stretched over chaos. Elizabeth Gross talks about the whirling, unpredictable movement of forces, vibratory oscillations that constitute the universe. Chaos may be understood not as absolute disorder, but rather a plethora of orders. And to engage with chaos is to find resonance, to extract oscillations from the fluctuating, self-differentiating structure of the universe. Živković expresses these processes of emergence, of life, and all identifiable things from the chaos, carrying them to the threshold of being fully formed. Hence, a hint at the tonal center, which are also a hint at the icing of the orthodox chant. Hence, certain pitch configurations that approach interval signals, in a ligeti-like fashion. Hence the sinuous melodic lines, but no true melodies. Melodies tend to be personalized. Instead, Živković prefers to, at least most of the time, to give us pre-personal becomings of glissando. Lines intertwined, but no counterpoint elements. Along with these, Gauss, Phil-Collier, they also emerge not through some imposed forms, predefined syntactic rules, preconceived goals, but through proliferation and differentiations. Microtones slow down the unfolding of music and allow some time for us to contemplate the process of the creation of identities, but not clear-cut identities themselves. This text was not meant to lead towards definitive conclusions. Instead, there will be nomadic wanderings among a few final thoughts. We may have begun with non-musical ideas, with representation of a spiritual world. Musical events have, however, emancipated from any representation. We may have begun by trying to unearth the connection between the musical text and its meaning, but we have reached the point where what matters is the connection between the sound and ourselves, the sound and the world's very being. We have asked ourselves what it means, but have come up with trying to grasp what it does. We were initially concerned with microtones. They now appear to have somewhat faded into background before the complexity of resources employed. Yet they do retain their important role as an intermediary milieu where the exchange between the internal and external territories takes place. And if we can talk about the depths of the sonic substance, these depths are not the structural depths of the quasi-Schenkerian stock. They are not Platonic ideas. It is rather the world of Democritus' atoms. Having delved deeper into this music, philokalia becomes less important as an ancient concept of spiritual masters, and certainly not as a set of beliefs signified by a musical system. It is important as a constellation of forces to be captured and made audible by music. Potentials and effects from which both the spiritual beliefs and the music arise. Philokalia does not shape the flow of music in any specific way, nor do Archytas, Spinoza, Leibniz, or Deleuze. For its part, music cannot produce philosophical concepts. Both sides express the being, the mineral, the animal, the human, the cosmic, the divine, in a single voice and on the same plane. The plane, the surface folded innumerable times, capable of folding itself into infinity of differences.
For your presentation, it is always fascinating to see how Eastern European countries have so many in common in terms of music. We also have composers who have turned to Orthodox music for inspiration, of course, in an avant-garde musical language. Do we have comments or questions from the audience? Yes, please.
Thank you, Niels. I wonder, you talk in the beginning of your position about the search of essence, and that he was also he has a kind of practice among the let's say folk music with the string instruments and microtones. And I want to know how much the practice of this music is the instrument he plays, the traditional instruments and the traditional music allowed him to penetrate this sense, or it's no the instruments and the means he does that music doesn't matter.
It probably does matter, but what particularly matters, he's, as I said, a professional violinist. He actively plays and he's an improviser. Improvisation certainly allows for some inaccuracies, and even if you're trying to be strictly tempered musician, there will be some slippages and everything. So one of the sources is that, although he likes to, refer very much to this tradition, he's become, since that time, that was a very well-recognized piece, winning the Romer Award and everything, but he has become a bit manneristic after that. It simply, it works very well within the community in Serbia, but somehow, refer to some, Eastern Orthodoxy that sounds in the West a bit exotic, and that's what we want to hear from those guys coming from that part of the world. So he tends a bit to exploit that. You wouldn't hear that sort of thing in this piece, which is really a masterpiece, but some of his later ones do show this mannerism. But anyhow, he really was very much into this tradition and these intonations. I mentioned that instrument, which is the word recognized in the Slavic world. I don't know whether we have anyone who similar words exist in other, which is very, very non-tempered and big part of Serbian heritage. Very much connected with very strong tendencies of retraditionalization, which we were very often to the detriment of our society experience.
And you said another day about the neutral,
But
the neutral third, not major, not minor, in between.
that actually exists. You won't hear that here because he doesn't really operate with, most of the time you don't hear any recognizable intervals. But basically, yes, there is this neutral third in certain tradition. Definitely, that exists.
I would have a question, if possible. I wish we could have listened more to his music, which is probably unknown to most of us. But I was wondering, I'm still going back to this Orthodox influences. Are they obvious to any listener anywhere in the world? Are they overt Orthodox allusions, or they are just for?
That's a
Because you mentioned microtonies. Okay, that's specific to Byzantine Orthodox music. But is this all there is to his orthodoxy?
Certainly not. What I said at a certain moment, you do have sometimes prolonged drone-like intonations, which is of course a very important facet.
Yes.
But it is so covered up that really no clear tonal center will ever emerge. Intonational center ever will really emerge. So to what extent would be that recognizable? I suspect that it will be recognizable, but because everyone will see the title and feels very good to give certain, his stage directions and anyone who is unaware of all that, what would they make out of that? It does have, when you listen to it, I remember hearing that in ballet performed by Klangfallen, major ensembles for contemporary music. It really does have kind of a hypnotic effect. I grant that.
How does the Orthodox tradition from that country react to the composition?
It's probably not played in churches.
No, I know that because they don't play music in churches, but music is
Instrumental
influenced in
music.
churches.
Right.
But I mean, do they know about this person? Do they know about the?
Most of the time, they will be too conservative to admit anything like that, to recognize anything like that. Of course, they're always individuals, but the church as an institution seems to me that they tend to ignore that.
It's very curious because in Romania, in the communist era, this used to be a token of national identity. The Orthodox resource, the Orthodox musical resource, that was the pride of Romanian music, as opposed to the bad Western avant-garde. So
don't forget that Romania's specific church was extremely nationalistic. We lived when in communist time, Yugoslavia was a multinational state, and actually nationalism was discouraged. So that's the situation in our countries from the point of view of the communist past is
different than in Romania.
I was thinking also about abordar, that is also a recognized author that has connections to Orthodoxy, and it had certain acceptance. For what I remember now from the Orthodox church from America, that is also very different thing. But
yeah, but our practice is really sounds so different.
Yeah. For that, I was thinking, well, this is so different from that example.
Although, of course, when I say so different, there's always some facet of it which could connect them, and you can make all kinds of connections.
There's early effects, which was actually very avant-garde, and at moments does not sound the same. So
Yeah, but I suspect
very interesting comparative studies to make there.
being an Estonian, you are very well aware of that. But the rest of the world, when we say aeropath, our first association is something completely different from what we're referring to.
Okay, one more short question because we are.
Could I just
No,
contribute
please,
to this interesting
Yes.
contribution of yours and this interesting discussion? I think the Orthodox tradition is not recognized on the West as the Orthodox tradition. If Živković was Bartok, for example, I think that the Western countries and organizations would learn through Živković about Orthodox tradition, then vice versa.
Yeah.
We have many composers, Serbian and very serious and very good composers who went to live to America, and they changed completely their musical language, aware of this. Milos pointed out that in America it is requested to be exotic, to be folkloric, to be if you are coming from locals, for example, just to make a career, and they changed completely. I was really impressed or shocked, I'm not sure, hearing their new American compositions, referring not to the folkloric tradition as Živković is really doing, researching that matrix, but referring to Bregović, for example,
Okay, so what stays
world
back?
music, Balkan, like mass, and the music for the movement for advertising and like that. So that is what is recognizable.
What the market
Popular
dictates.
music, yes, the market, yes, but not the deep tradition.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Milos. We are ready for our next speaker, which is Renata Skupin from the Stanisław Moniuszko Academy of Music and Dance, with her paper À la recherche des sons, lente orientale et personnes d'Orient d'Alexandre Kansman et la question de l'intentionnalité.
Les aspects que je voudrais aborder ici font partie de mes recherches concernant les rencontres imaginaires et réelles des compositeurs polonais avec l'autre oriental, mais aussi de divers aspects de théorie et méthodologie d'analyse de l'orientalisme en tant que catégorie musicale. Le répertoire des œuvres orientalistes est immense et il est presque impossible d'en compiler une liste complète. Cependant, il soit souhaitable de viser cet objectif et commencer par assembler des sous-collections limitées, par exemple la musique orientaliste polonaise de la première moitié du XXe siècle, que c'est une tâche déjà accomplie, et l'orientalisme, par exemple, français du XIXe siècle, etc. D'où l'idée de créer un catalogue sous forme électronique pour mener mes propres recherches, mais aussi comme une base de données en interaxe. Maintenant, je vais faire un petit peu de publicité pour voilà. Ce catalogue est désormais disponible en ligne sur un site web en langue anglaise, bien qu'il est souvent encore une certaine scène, il le restera en permanence en tant qu'une liste ouverte des œuvres inspirées par l'Orient tout court. En outre, un index, voilà. Merci. En outre, un index des compositeurs, il y a aussi des listes des œuvres par titre, mais aussi il y a la possibilité de rechercher, de sélectionner des œuvres selon de différents accès. L'affiliation genre, le statut, ça veut dire une œuvre autonome ou une partie d'un cycle, ou aussi l'affiliation qui est tout à fait générale, et aussi bien sûr des aspects qui sont liés à l'effectif. Et le site sera également un référentiel des articles sur le catalogue lui-même, bien évidemment ma définition de l'orientalisme, de l'orient et de l'orientalia musical. Voilà, c'est tout pour cette publicité. Et maintenant, pour en revenir à Alexander Tansman, est un compositeur polonais d'origine juive, un musicien cosmopolite naturalisé en France. Et devant cette œuvre, la première question cruciale que je voudrais poser, c'est qu'est-ce qui est oriental dans la plante orientale et la berceuse d'Orient, et pour qui l'est-ce? Alors, la collection orientaliste tasmanienne est relativement importante par rapport aux compositeurs contemporains, pas seulement polonais. Elle comprend 6 compositions instrumentales, dont quelques versions. C'est une stratégie de recyclage typique non seulement à Tasman, bien évidemment, 2 opéras et un cycle de chansons, et 11 petits morceaux pour enfants. Le choix de 2 pièces de cette collection n'est pas fortuit. Il s'agit de la première œuvre orientaliste de Tansman, écrite dans les années 1917-19, et exécutée alors qu'il vivait en Pologne. Et la dernière, dont l'orientalité n'est pas seulement un arrière-plan, comme c'est là dans le cas de l'opéra de ce fresque lyrique, sa bataille le faux Messie. De la sorte, nous pouvons observer et comparer les orientalismes tasmaniens d'avant et d'après son voyage aux pays orientaux. Ça veut dire Japon, Chine, Philippines, Singapour, Bali, Ceylon, Inde, Égypte, dans les années, enfin, le voyage qu'il a effectué dans les années 1932-33, dans le cadre d'une tournée artistique autour du monde durant presque un an. Les concerts qu'il a écoutés, les rencontres avec des musiciens, l'approche directe de l'authentique orientale, ont-ils influencé de transformation de sa technique de composition ou la manière dont l'autre oriental est représenté dans sa musique? Ça, c'est une question à poser. Le premier point qui peut donner matière à réflexion est que même en 1956, ça veut dire dans la berceuse d'Orient, qui date de cette année, Tansman n'a pas abandonné l'homogénéisation de l'oriental, bien que dans d'autres œuvres, par exemple, voilà, quelques-unes, les modèles dans lesquels il puise sont définis et différenciés très clairement. Par exemple, dans son complainte de Nico ou les esquisses javanaises. Or, dans la plainte orientale, de même que dans la berceuse d'Orient, il ne s'agit pas d'orientalisme comme des feuilles de voyage, des cartes postales sonores, mais de vagues réminiscences ou évocations d'une expressivité mélancolique, d'un lament lointain et d'une somnolence mystérieuse. En fait, il n'est pas certain que l'intention du compositeur était de représenter un sujet authentiquement oriental ou stylisé à l'oriental, orientalisant ou orientaliste. Ni la petite suite, ni la suite monopolonica ou les 6 pièces pour guitare n'ont pas été mentionnées par Tansman dans son autobiographie exhaustive, et nous n'en trouvons aucune trace dans ces autres écrits ou correspondances récemment publiées sous la direction de Mireille Tansman-Zanetti, une des filles du compositeur, est préfacé par Gérard Hugon, qui est son dernier biographe, sauf une simple affirmation que la suite Mondo Polemico compte au nombre des compositions les plus largement diffusées de l'État. Le contact direct avec l'autre oriental a sans aucun doute été une expérience enrichissante pour Tasman. Dans ce journal intime, Tasman écrit que l'après-midi passé avec Mahatma Gandhi a eu une profonde influence sur sa formation spirituelle ultérieure. Il se sentit enrichi par cette expérience unique qui a influencé la formation de sa religion personnelle qui correspondait à certains principes de l'hindouisme, de la Bible et des idées spinoziennes. Je ne fus jamais attaché avec lui, mais ma foi s'était toujours placée en dehors des chapelles confessionnelles qui défiguraient le message et le verbe révélés par des interprétations arbitraires et utilitaires. Et c'est à propos de Pékin, la Chine généralement, qu'il a constaté une fois de plus, je réalisais combien les complexités de supériorité artistique et spirituelle occidentale révélaient du narcissisme. Cette impression ne fut qu'augmentée tout au long de mon voyage, depuis le Japon jusqu'aux pyramides et au trésor de Toutankhamon. Cependant, et c'est ma thèse ma thèse principale, la musicalité de l'Orient ou des stimuli orientaux extra-musicaux n'ont pas influencé la transformation de la technique de composition tasmanienne, bien qu'ils aient enrichi les orientalismes. Alors, analyse. Je me concentrerai sur la recherche d'un sens musical des œuvres analysées, or celui-ci qui réside dans la structure de l'œuvre, car dans ce sens-là que son contenu, Gehalt, est inclus. C'est un concept de Hans-Heinrich Hegerberg qui interprète. La plainte orientale est le 5e mouvement de la petite suite pour piano, l'une des 3 compositions avec 8 mélodies japonaises, Saikai et l'album polonais, que le jeune Tasman, âgé seulement de 22 ans, a présenté à Maurice Ravel en lui demandant l'évaluation. Le fait que son nouveau mentor français l'a aussi recommandé à son auteur, Eugène Demey, montre que ce recueil était apprécié. Et c'était le début d'une carrière vertigineuse de Tasman à Paris, où il fut totalement immergé dans la vie musicale internationale, entretenant des relations privilégiées avec les plus importantes personnalités musicales d'alors, telles que, à part Ravel, Roussel, Honegger, Milos, Stravinsky, Bartók, Prokofiev, Hindemith, Gershwin, Dalla Piccola, Kusevitsky, Goldschmann, Monteux, Rubinstein, Yankelevich, etc. Avant son départ pour la France, Tasman n'avait aucun contact avec l'authentique oriental. Par conséquent, son Orient à lui, à cette époque, ne pouvait être qu'imaginaire et renvoyant au style orientaliste déjà bien établi dans la musique occidentale. Pour le jeune compositeur désireux d'être considéré comme un moderniste, orientalisme débussiste ou ravelien était le plus proche, mais difficile à suivre, car, à l'exception peut-être de Pagode de Debussy, les influences orientales directes chez eux sont difficiles à prouver, sauf par certaines associations timbriques. Le terme plainte lui-même est utilisé principalement dans la musique française du XVIIe et XVIIIe siècle, ou dans la musique dans le style français de cette période, pour une pièce lente, expressive et de caractère lamentable. Et, par exemple, Plainte faite à Londres pour passer la mélancolie de clavecin de Froberger, qui est marqué pour être joué lentement, avec discrétion, c'est-à-dire avec un rubato sensible et expressif tel qu'il était également approprié dans le tombeau. Le terme plainte n'est pas associé à une forme spécifique, mais plutôt à des pièces utilisant des techniques particulières pour exprimer la tristesse, le chagrin, la douleur ou le doux pathos, comme les tendres plaintes de Rameau, qui sont destinées à transmettre des sentiments plus positifs, l'humeur accablé de tristesse. Les plaintes empruntent souvent des caractéristiques communes de lamento italien, enraciné dans les formes vocales madrigolaires, notamment les variations sur une basse chromatique ostinato d'un tétrachorde descendant, des accords de tierces descendants. Plusieurs éléments emblématiques du genre lamento, bien encadrés dans l'écriture harmonique du néoclassicisme tasmanien, peuvent être reconnus dans la plainte orientale en question. Par exemple, un tempo long, une métrique fortement accentuée, des figures rythmiques triplettes, l'ostinato de tétrachordes descendants structurés de diverses manières allant d'un traitement strict du motif simple ou un traitement plus libre de l'une de ces variantes, comme une version chromatique ou inversée. Exploitation des tétrachordes comme une source de dissonance harmonique, mélodique ou rythmique, créée par des suspensions, des syncopes, des chevauchements de phrases entre le plan mélodique et la basse. Des formes motiviques irrégulières d'une expressivité intense, spécifiée verbalement sur la partition dolce, dolcissimo, espressivo, amoroso, mais aussi dans les caractéristiques du matériau sonore, la dynamique, piano, pianissimo, l'articulation, le legato, un poco marcato, et des traits de la facture instrumentale, la pédale harmonique, rythmique, souvent en fonction d'ostinato. La structure formelle comme une variation séquentielle avec un développement important du matériau motif, des cellules sonores très syncopées et une large phrase basée sur le mouvement des triolets. Il semble que l'intention du compositeur était de ne pas orientaliser ce lamento qu'au niveau expressif, programmatique. Et le seul programme, entre guillemets, de cette œuvre est d'exprimer une plante mystérieuse, intense, par sa profondeur et sa couleur vaguement étrange. Écoutons un fragment de cette plainte dite orientale. Merci. La berceuse d'Orient était à l'origine le cinquième mouvement de la suite pour guitare composée en 1956 est dédié à Andrés Segovia, à qui Tasman a dédié près de 15 œuvres pour guitare seule et qui était l'un de ses plus chers amis. Le guitariste espagnol a retenu 3 pièces de cette suite, Rêverie à la Polacca berceuse d'Orient, voilà, et publiée aux éditions Max et Schick sous le titre de 3 pièces. Celles-ci furent incorporées ensuite en 1962 dans la suite, attention, In Modo Polonico, un recueil de 9 morceaux dont les 2 premières sont des élaborations de pièces pour le luth d'auteurs anonymes du XVIIe siècle. S'ils sont les auteurs polonais comme prétend Frédéric Zigal, Thérèse Approuvé. L'entrée avec référence en branle simple d'origine française et gaillarde d'origine italienne. à ces danses de corps, particulièrement polonais, et très répandues dans toute l'Europe depuis la Renaissance, ont été ajoutées des danses et des mélodies inspirées du folklore polonais. Kujawiak, qui est un arrangement d'un célèbre Kujawiak, Umar Maciek est mort, et Oberek. Tous deux, ainsi que la polonaise, tempo polonaise, et alla polacca, avec les éléments typiques de Mazur, sont en fait des stylisations néoclassicistes des danses nationales polonaises. Dans le présent cas, c'est-à-dire la version d'Orient, Tansman poursuit également la tradition occidentale européenne du genre musical, la berceuse, une forme tripartite. Le procédé de la technique de variation basée sur des figures de basse ostinato au niveau microphonal. Tempo calme, le ton binaire, la sensation de balancement obtenue par l'utilisation de triolets, mais aussi au niveau harmonique par une alternance répétitive des accords majeurs et mineurs, donc les tierces qui, entre guillemets, balancent. Basso ostinato est une formule mélodique sinusoïdale qui berce dans l'espace les figures rythmiques perpétuelles qui assurent la monotonie du mouvement dans le temps. À niveau dynamique bas, une basse du pédale comme un ostinato harmonique stabilisant une tonique locale ou oscillant entre deux accords, généralement à une distance d'une quarte, sur lequel est placée une mélodie simple variée ensuite par une profusion de passages filigranes, tout comme chez Chopin, qui a développé un modèle pour la berceuse en tant que pièce instrumentale. Une expressivité calme définie verbalement, grazioso cantabile, comme une berceuse à chanter. Les procédés de la technique de composition ici sont plus proches de l'écriture harmonique tonale, fonctionnelle. Tansman il est revenu sur la mise en évidence de relations carte-quintelle et du potentiel de différenciation de modes majeurs et mineurs. Et ceci est compréhensible car Tansman s'est servi des figures d'exotisation stéréotype très connues déjà dans la musique du XIXe siècle, de la seconde augmentée dite orientale, qui fonctionne de préférence dans le contexte tonal. Les autres caractéristiques structurelles qui pourraient être traitées comme orientalisation intentionnelle sont peu nombreuses. Ce ne sont que des orientalismes à l'ancienne, comme le mouvement mélodique des secondes descendantes sur l'échelle éolienne, le bourdon harmonique, ici bien évidemment lié à la technique de guitare, et les mélismes mélodiques subtils. Les expressions verbales telles que lontano, le même cantabile espressivo, ou les sonorités des harmoniques à l'octave peuvent devenir des porteurs d'orientalité, mais cela nous amène déjà au niveau de l'intention de lecteur, intention lectori, de l'interprète qui exigerait d'adopter une isotopie sémantique orientale. Maintenant, je voudrais la présenter comme... La seconde file orientale a été déjà utilisée par les compositeurs de nature égyptienne, mais aussi de même que dans la partie du célébrant de la synagogue de l'opéra Saint-Barthélemy, là encore comme un exosème de la musique juive. Pourquoi donc, de plus, a-t-il orienté la polonité en incluant versets d'Orient si stéréotypiquement orientalisés dans la suite du modo polonico? Même si, comme le prétend Frédéric Zimmermann, la suite est le fruit du courage réalisé par Andrés Segovia, c'est le compositeur lui-même qui, voyant au croisement des cultures polonaises et françaises, on supposait que c'était sa façon d'accepter le point de vue de ses contemporains francophones de l'époque. L'homme même est une phrase assez déjà célèbre d'un musicologue belge, Joseph Breuer. Voilà, vous la voyez. La phrase tasmanienne est lourde de cette poésie où appelait l'Orient, mais d'un Orient dépouillé de sa défroque bariolée. D'ailleurs, depuis 1918, l'Asie commence peut-être aux frontières orientales de la Pologne. Ça semble vraiment pour nous, les Polonais, un peu exotiquement, je dirais. C'est un problème à part, je crois. La manière dont la musique de l'Europe centrale, même pas de l'Europe de l'Est, mais de l'Europe centrale, surtout des pays slaves occidentaux, est généralement perçue par des récipients des pays situés plus à l'ouest, reste complexe ou parfois perplexe. Nous pouvons observer une certaine contradiction relationnelle vis-à-vis de l'axe Occident-Orient, qui nous concerne, le polonais en particulier, mais je crois que ce n'est pas un problème seulement le polonais, en particulier à cause de notre localisation Est-Ouest, comme l'a ironiquement formulé son biologique. À l'Est, nous, les Polonais, la Pologne, nous sommes localisés à l'Est de l'Ouest et à l'Ouest de l'Est. Dans la suite patchwork polonais, entre guillemets, inspirée par Segovia, cette orientalisation de la polonité est évidente. Paradoxalement, dans la vision musicale stéréotypée de l'hispanité, résonnent aussi des secondes et des mélismes mélodiques dites orientales. Est-il possible une double orientalisation à l'envers? L'Orient paraît nous désorienter, je dirais. Toutefois, il ne peut être exclu de la culture occidentale car lui-même reste indispensable pour occidentaliser l'Occident. Alors nous sommes liés pour toujours. Merci.
Renata, on a temps pour une question peut-être. Si vous pouvez, on peut parler en anglais ou en français. Moi, j'ai une courte question. Vous avez mentionné au début de la présentation de votre définition de l'orientalisme. C'est quel?
L'orientalisme, c'est une question qui est, enfin, c'est la manière dont le compositeur inclut les éléments qui lui-même pense d'être oriental dans sa musique. Alors, ce n'est pas l'Orient. Voilà, l'Orient n'est pas la réalité, mais l'Orient, c'est un symbole, ou plutôt des symboles. Alors, l'Orient dans la musique renvoie à un symbole qui n'est pas la réalité, mais qui est lié, voilà, l'imagination. Alors, c'est toujours, enfin, le but de l'analyse, de l'interprétation, de découvrir ce que le compositeur pensait de l'Orient et puis comment il l'a fait pour introduire dans son œuvre.
C'est plutôt comme l'exotique, non?
Oui, mais l'exotique, enfin, c'est plus facile parce que l'exotique exige que quelque chose soit l'autre. Mais l'Orient, c'est parfois le thème. Alors, comment le thème peut être l'autre, enfin, comme quelque chose d'extra. Ça peut être le mien. C'est juste le thème. Alors, c'est vraiment difficile, mais c'est très intéressant comme le sujet de l'interprétation.
Merci. Autre question? Sinon, merci Renata. So we we are ready to move to the next and last speaker of this session, Mendoza, with the work "Tutti, the Solo's Metamorphosis."
I'm Silvia Mendonça. I'm Portuguese. It's a big pleasure to be here in this fantastic city. I'm a composer, researcher, and music teacher in a small city near Lisbon. I don't know if you know Portugal. This presentation is based on some aspects of my PhD, where the main topic of that research was the unison linked to aspects of composition and musical performance. That research comes in the context of a composition I wrote about texts of a Portuguese poet, Fernando Pessoa, 20th century. And that drew my attention on the way of dealing with the elements that I'm here to discuss today, which are the tutti and the solo. All the composers think with relation and what aspects can be considered to treat the relation of this musical pair in a contemporary perspective. What I call the solo's metamorphosis represents, on the one hand, all of my research experience about unison, but also the way of thinking the relation between this pair from a musical point of view. I will start with the first composition that was the starting point of the research. Then I will talk a little about the relation between the nation and pair. I will also show some perspectives of 20th century composers. And I will finish with the second composition as a new stage of this research. Then I will present some conclusions. In 2012, I composed the piece for two voices, mezzo, soprano, and baritono, and orchestra. I used a poem by Fernando Pessoa entitled "I Am the Skateboard." It's a very small poem. It's like this: I am the skateboard. When I was born, they locked me up inside me, but I left. My soul seeks me through hills and valley. I hope my soul never finds me. And I decided to treat this poem with a single musical element, the unison. And this piece, I could not really find a solution. I was looking for in a certain way, which related this element to the idea of the poem. So I decided to continue speculating about this element in my music, in my research. And what I was looking for was to merge the two supposed soloists with the orchestra, a solution that I wasn't ready to find yet, very complex solution from an orchestral point of view. I will show an excerpt from the premiere of this piece, and it shows a little bit of my attempt to merge all these elements. This was the first. It is within this process that arises the question on the relation between the solo and tutti. The dichotomy between solo and tutti in music as ancestral roots, inevitably inseparable from Christian liturgical chant, the Gregorian chant, namely in its responsory classic form, a question-answer dialogue played in alternation between the soloist and the choir. From the 16th century onwards, we find this idea expanded with the concerto as a musical form, where the most contrasting instrumental sonorities between individual and collective, soloist and orchestra are explored in a real dramatic confrontation. The etymology is uncertain, but the word concerto seems to have originated from the conjunction of two Latin words, concerere, meaning to tie, to join, to with, and certamen, meaning competition, fight. The idea is that the two parts in a concerto, the soloist and the orchestra, alternate episodes of opposition, cooperation, and independence in the creation of the music. Analyzing Beethoven's second piano concerto, Joseph Kerman, musicologist and music critic, points to some structural features for the conception of an archetypal trajectory of the relationship between the soloist and the orchestra. Some quotes. The three movements of the concerto trace a sequence from interaction to some sort of respite to complicity, from collaborative and creative exchange to accommodation. After all, the interactions of solo and tutti during the course of a concerto are more immediately graspable by an audience that are details of thematic process and harmony that lend themselves so well to the analysis of notated music. In the collaborative test situation, the soloist presents himself to the orchestra and shows how he is able to cope with conditions they have laid down. Those conditions are not inflexible in the process of dialogue. They can change considerably, for the orchestra allows and indeed encourages criticism, initiative, even spontaneous display and acrobatics on the part of the soloist. Some perspectives on this musical pair from composers from 20th century. Sofia Guadagnina, in an interview with Veryl Komsky, says that it is necessary to find new interpretations for the soloist-orchestra relationship. I quote, and in the 20th century, as in the past, the combination of the soloist and orchestra is attractive to composers. The concept of the concerto, however, has changed drastically since the 19th century. In particular, the concept of a hero, personified by the soloist, is now completely different. The soloist is no longer a hero, in the same sense as in the classical and romantic concertos. At that time, the hero was victorious, an outstanding individual, a winner in an unequal competition. The main presumption was that the hero knows the absolute truth, knows where to lead the crowd. Accordingly, the typical musical concept was the opposition of the soloist and the orchestra, which represented such dramatic oppositions as a hero and a crowd, a hero and an army, an orator and an audience. In the 20th century, these concepts have become irrelevant and anachronistic as the concept of the victor. In the 20th century, the situation is quite different. The hero is disappointed in everything. Nobody knows what the truth is. And contemporary composers need to search for new concepts, new interpretations of soloist-orchestra relations. I too am searching. End of quote. I left here some examples, but I didn't play because they are too large, and I'm not really interested in choose some parts. Okay, I left some pieces. John Cage in his concerto for prepared piano and orchestra. Cage conceived his concerto as a portrayal of the opposition and reconciliation of piano and orchestra. I made it into a drama between the piano, which remains romantic, expressive, and the orchestra, which itself follows the principles of Oriental philosophy. And the third movement signifies the coming together of things which were opposed to one another in the first movement. The dramatic plan mirrored an inner conflict. This concerto is a lack of resolution between letting the aggregates of sounds emerge by themselves and continuing to experiment with my own personal tastes. These are the two poles of that concerto, and I let the pianist express the opinion that music should be improvised or felt, while the orchestra expressed only the chart with no personal taste involved. And Morton Feldman's, I put some work introductions from Universal Edition, editor afterwards. Morton Feldman's Piano and Orchestra is one of a series of pieces by Feldman whose title merely describes its instrumentation, directing the audience's attention to the color of the work rather than to the process of composition. This work is also described as a balancing act on the tiniest possible line between soloist and orchestra. Rim describes his dithyrambic concerts as fast dance music in which the string quartet, the soloists, represents a creature with four mouths, one beast. This beast is surrounded by the orchestra as if by a cage or a chamber with open windows. Inside, the quartet plays chamber music, or else the orchestra is a body inside which the nerves, the quartet, dance. Rim further notes, I usually write nervous music for string quartets. I perceive this instrumental combination as naked, with all the nerves exposed. Yet by giving voice to both the beast and the cage, Rim puts the madness in the same perspective. Aside from the occasional notes of the bowed antique cymbals, the string quartet remains alone to the end of the piece. A few measures of slow and subdued chords ending with a classical simple D minor chord. Is this ending really incongruous, or does it have a specific meaning? Resolution, or perhaps the contrary, resignation and loss of hope. It is up to each of us to decide, yet it is not necessary to verbalize our reaction. And the last composer, Ligeti, is for me one of the composers besides Steve Reich or John Cage, who takes the idea of the soloist further or to another extreme. Not only in this work, but also in other works of this time. The work is written. This work is written for a choir of 16 soloist voices. The concept of micropolyphony used by Ligeti describes his compositional process of this time, which is based fundamentally on the superposition of chromatic canons within an interval model with limits in the octave and in the unison. The melodic lines exist in the different voices, respecting the succession of notes, and as they vary rhythmically, become microscopically concentrated, saturated, and multiplied, not distinguishable individually, giving rise to large masses or surfaces of timbres. The composer seeks in this way to erase his model operandi in his composition and let the listener only hear sound Based on this metamorphosis of the solo, I want to show a second composition. It's a piece of a long process of research about this element, the unison, and where this part of the solo it's a little part of the research. It was that pieces that I wrote in this process turned to privilege not musicians, but people, normal people that are not musicians in the music fabric. So this piece called The Rest is for electronic. Integrates another audiovisual project made by the School Ensemble for the exhibition MAGA 2020 at the Silos Creative Container in Caldas da Rainha City in Portugal. In a site-specific approach, the electronic was composed from previous recordings of 3 different voices. Each of the voices was recorded in a different silo. No previous tuning between the voices was taken into account, since not all the participants have musical training. Only some very simple pitch indications were given to be explored by the voice, such as high or low, short or long. The grain silos destined to store the grain and keep it dry, thus avoiding its deterioration, constitute the creative microcosm from which we extract the grain, the punctum, in the manner of Roland Barthes, or the point of Vasily Kaminsky, or of composers like Ligeti or Justin Kuselsky. Here, the grain is like a revealed body resting on a note. Each voice or each body rests on a note that is captured and recorded individually. In a later phase, these recordings were used to build the sound fabric, the mass and the resonance, the treatment given to the sounds being fundamentally pitch shifting operations, having as structural reference an interval model that oscillates between the fifth, the octave, the unison, and silence. Except no,
Do you have it in a separate?
no, it's independent. So, some conclusions. The relentless composer's renewal of approaches to time and space shall show how musical entities can sometimes change their expressive value and therefore their own conceptual function. I was concerned with the way composers treat this relationship with these identities from the point of view of communication and dialogue, since it symbolized the relationship between man and the divine until the very unfolding and metamorphosis of the soloist. In other words, a great change in appearance. In this sense, the aim was to understand the repercussions alike to its plastic treatment in musical composition, from the simplest relationship to perceive, linked to aspects of sound intensity, to the complexity and multiplicity of temporal layers of the 20th century, linked to aspects of sound density, where inside the tutti, everyone can be treated as a soloist. We can state that these questions can illuminate some topics related to identity, authority, or freedom, concerning to the various actors involved in the experience of musical making and signification. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there questions or comments? I would have a question, if possible, regarding this last piece. It's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the voices were separately recorded, yes, and then put together
in a space. They are recorded at the same space.
Okay, but separately. Does this mean that this piece could not be performed live?
Like this? No, because I didn't wrote the score.
Okay, so you didn't mean it to be performed live at some point.
I was experienced. My main point is experimenting with people that are not musicians.
Okay.
In the specific place, and this was the result. But this is a work in progress, and maybe I
may develop.
Yes.
Any other commentaries, observations, questions? Well, if not, Milos, please.
It's something like an amendment to your observation about the legatee etc. There is also part of the texture or a phase of the composition when the texture thins out and certain interval signals emerge. And it could even be demonstrated that there is some kind of a process leading towards them. I argue that there is teleology in that piece. Even though it is really very much micropolyphonic and outwardly very static, inside everything is brewing, like an ant hill or something like that. But basically, it also can be listened to as progression towards certain goals. Just a suggestion of.
Yes, I understand, because there are intervals in the Música that are points where our perception will rest. That are these intervals, yes, and the perfect intervals, and that I don't know if what answer to.
No, it's just an addition to what you actually said.
Thank you, everyone. And to conclude, I must personally admit how much I appreciate your handwritten presentation. I don't think I have seen that in Europe. We are all so dependent on technology that we have forgotten to do this.
Yes.
So
It's
it was like a return to childhood. I was talking to Gosia in the break about the ability.
it's a long
the
time
lost
process.
ability
It's a
to-
long time process, and you memorize and you internalize. No other way. I think I always write. I write books.
That's fascinating, really.
Who would be able to read it? I mean, I wouldn't. My
Well-
own handwriting.
Okay, okay, that's.
Let alone somebody else's.
Well, thank you, everybody.